The desperate wail of a baby pierced the hot August air as Tabitha Clarke clutched her 3-month-old daughter closer to her chest. Her wrists chafed raw from the manacles binding them. The year was 1876, and the merciless Arizona sun beat down upon the makeshift auction platform erected in the dusty main street of Prescott. Tabitha's tears had long since dried, leaving salty trails down her dirt-smudged cheeks as she stood trembling before the crowd of jeering men. "Next up, gentlemen, a healthy young woman and her infant, 2 for the price of 1, bellowed the auctioneer, a portly man with greasy hair and a handlebar mustache that twitched when he spoke. "Who'll start the bidding at $50? Tabitha had never imagined her life would come to this. Just 6 months ago, she had been a respected schoolteacher in Boston. Then she'd made the fatal mistake of falling for the charming words of Franklin Owens, a man who had promised her the world and delivered only heartbreak. He'd convinced her to leave everything behind, marry him in secret, and journey west where opportunities awaited. By the time they reached Arizona territory, she was with child, and Franklin's true colors emerged: a gambler, a drunk, and ultimately, a thief who'd sold her into bondage to cover his debts before disappearing into the night. $60, shouted a voice from the crowd. 70, countered another. Tabitha's eyes darted desperately across the sea of unfamiliar faces, searching for any sign of compassion. Her baby, Emily, squirmed in her arms, sensing her mother's distress. $100, called a new voice, strong and clear above the rabble. The crowd parted, revealing a tall figure at the back. He moved forward with purposeful strides, his spurs jingling with each step. Tabitha's breath caught in her throat as she observed him, broad-shouldered, with a weathered face that spoke of years under the harsh western sun. A tan Stetson hat sat atop his head, and a leather vest covered his cotton shirt. His eyes, a startling blue against his sun-darkened skin, met hers for a fleeting moment. "We have 100 from Mr. Garrett Blackburn," the auctioneer announced, looking pleased at the higher bid. "Do I hear 110? A tense silence fell over the crowd. Some men shifted uncomfortably, others muttered under their breath. Garrett Blackburn's reputation preceded him, a successful rancher whose property spanned hundreds of acres outside of town. Few wanted to challenge him. Going once. Going twice. Sold to Mr. Blackburn for $100. Tabitha's heart hammered in her chest as she was roughly pushed toward her new owner. Would this man be any kinder than Franklin? What horrors awaited her and her innocent daughter? Garrett approached the platform and handed a leather pouch to the auctioneer. Without a word, he reached for the key to Tabitha's shackles, which the auctioneer surrendered with a nod. "Come with me," Garrett said quietly, unlocking her restraints. Tabitha flinched as the manacles fell away, revealing raw, bleeding skin beneath. She clutched Emily tighter, ready to run if given even the slightest chance. "I won't hurt you or your child," Garrett added, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "But we need to leave now." With no choice but to comply, Tabitha followed him through the dispersing crowd. Some men cast knowing glances their way, and she felt her face burn with shame and fear. Garrett led her to a sturdy wagon parked at the edge of the town square. A young boy, no more than 12, sat holding the reins. "This is Tommy," Garrett said. "He helps at the ranch." Tommy nodded respectfully at Tabitha, his curious eyes momentarily lingering on the baby before looking away. "Madam," he greeted softly. Garrett helped her into the wagon bed, which had been lined with blankets. "It's a 2-hour ride to my property," he explained. "Try to rest if you can." As the wagon lurched forward, Tabitha finally found her voice. "What do you want from me?" she asked, her words barely audible over the creaking wheels. Garrett looked back at her, his expression unreadable. "Nothing," he replied. When we reach my ranch, you and your baby will be free to go." Tabitha stared at him in disbelief. "Free? Yes, madam, free." For the first time in months, a glimmer of hope sparked within Tabitha's heart. But experience had taught her that men's promises were as substantial as dust in the wind. She would believe his words when she saw them proven true. The journey to Garrett's ranch passed in tense silence. The landscape gradually changed from the dusty streets of Prescott to rolling hills dotted with scrub brush and the occasional juniper tree. Emily eventually fell asleep in Tabitha's arms, her tiny fists clenched as she dreamed. When they crested a final hill, Tabitha caught her first glimpse of Garrett Blackburn's property, a sprawling ranch nestled in a valley, with a large two-story house, several outbuildings, and vast grazing lands where cattle roamed. A wooden sign reading "Sunrise Ranch" marked the entrance to the property. "Home," Tommy announced proudly as they approached. The wagon rolled to a stop in front of the main house, and Garrett jumped down, offering his hand to help Tabitha. She hesitated before accepting his assistance, still wary of his intentions. "Mrs. Holloway," Garrett called toward the house. A moment later, a plump older woman with silver-streaked hair appeared on the porch, wiping her hands on her apron. Her eyes widened at the sight of Tabitha and the baby. "Oh my," she said, hurrying down the steps. "You poor dears, come inside right away. Mrs. Holloway is my housekeeper," Garrett explained to Tabitha. "She'll show you where you can wash up and rest. You're safe here." Tabitha followed Mrs. Holloway into the house, her legs trembling with exhaustion. The interior was surprisingly comfortable, clean, and well-furnished, with handmade quilts and polished wood furniture. "The master told me he might be bringing guests home," Mrs. Holloway said, leading Tabitha to a bedroom on the first floor. "This room is yours for as long as you need it. There's a wash basin with fresh water, and I'll bring you some food shortly. Is there anything specific the little one needs?" Overcome by the unexpected kindness, Tabitha felt tears welling in her eyes again. She's been feeding from me, but I haven't had much to eat myself lately." Mrs. Holloway's expression softened with understanding. "I'll bring you a hearty meal right away, dear. And perhaps some milk for the baby, if she takes it." Left alone in the room, Tabitha gently laid Emily on the bed and took her first proper look around. A large window overlooked a small garden, and a rocking chair sat in the corner. On the dresser, a porcelain basin filled with clean water beckoned her. Tabitha quickly washed her face and hands, wincing as the water touched her raw wrists. She had just finished when Mrs. Holloway returned with a tray of food, a bowl of fragrant stew, freshly baked bread, and a glass of milk. "Eat up, dear," the housekeeper encouraged. "When you're feeling stronger, the master would like to speak with you in the study." Tabitha's stomach nodded with anxiety. "Did he say what about?" "No, but don't you worry. Mr. Blackburn is a good man. Strange sometimes in his ways, but good-hearted." After Tabitha had eaten and fed Emily, she reluctantly made her way to the study, where Garrett sat at a desk reviewing papers. He stood when she entered, gesturing for her to take a seat across from him. "I hope the room is suitable," he said. "It's more than suitable," Tabitha replied carefully. "Thank you for your hospitality, Mr. Blackburn, but I still don't understand why you've brought me here." Garrett leaned back in his chair, studying her thoughtfully. "What's your name? They didn't announce it at the auction." "Tabitha." "Tabitha Clarke." She hesitated, then added, "And this is Emily." "How old is she?" "3 months." Garrett nodded, his expression softening slightly as he looked at the sleeping baby. "Miss Clarke, Mrs." Tabitha corrected automatically, then bit her lip. "Though I suppose that no longer matters. Your husband abandoned us. He's the one who—" She couldn't finish the sentence. "I see." Garrett's jaw tightened momentarily, "Mrs. Clarke, I meant what I said in town. You're not a prisoner here. I purchased you and your daughter to set you free, not to own you." "Why would you do that?" Tabitha asked, unable to hide her suspicion. Garrett stood and walked to the window, his back to her as he spoke. "5 years ago, my sister found herself in a similar situation. Her husband gambled away everything they had, including her. I wasn't there to help her." He turned to face Tabitha, his eyes reflecting old pain. "She died before I could find her." Understanding dawned on Tabitha. "So this is atonement, call it what you will," he replied. "I couldn't save her, but I could help you. You can stay here until you decide what you want to do next. The stagecoach passes through once a week if you wish to leave Arizona altogether." "And if I have nowhere to go," Tabitha whispered, "then you can stay as long as you need. There's a small cabin on the property that was built for the foreman, but he prefers to bunk with the other hands. With some work, it could be a suitable home for you and your daughter." Tabitha stared at him, searching for deception in his features and finding none. "I don't know how I can repay such kindness." "There's no need," Garrett assured her. "Though if you're inclined to work while you're here, Mrs. Holloway could use help with household duties. I understand you were a teacher before." Surprise flashed across Tabitha's face. "How did you know?" A faint smile touched Garrett's lips. "The way you speak. It's not common in these parts." For the first time in months, Tabitha felt herself relax slightly. "Yes, I taught at a girls' school in Boston." "Then perhaps you might consider teaching Tommy and some of the ranch hands' children. Many of them have never had proper schooling." The prospect of returning to her vocation sent a thrill through Tabitha. "I would like that very much, Mr. Blackburn." "Garrett, please." He rose, signaling the end of their conversation. "Rest now, Mrs. Clarke. Tomorrow will be soon enough to make decisions." That night, lying in a real bed for the first time in weeks, with her daughter sleeping peacefully beside her, Tabitha allowed herself to believe that perhaps their fortune had finally changed. The following days passed in a blur as Tabitha settled into life at Sunrise Ranch. Mrs. Holloway Martha, as she insisted, Tabitha took her under her wing, introducing her to the rhythms of ranch life and fussing over Emily as if she were her own grandchild. Garrett remained something of a mystery. He spent most days working with his men, returning to the house only for meals and often retiring to his study afterward. He was unfailingly polite, but maintained a careful distance that Tabitha couldn't help but notice. A week after her arrival, Garrett showed her the cabin he'd mentioned. It stood on a gentle rise overlooking a small stream, its windows facing east to catch the morning sun. Inside was simple but sturdy: a main room with a fireplace, a small kitchen area, and 2 bedrooms. "It needs work," Garrett acknowledged as they stood in the doorway. "New curtains, perhaps, some furniture." "It's perfect," Tabitha breathed, already imagining making this space their own. "I'll have the men bring over whatever you need from the main house," Garrett offered. "Martha can help you settle in." Tabitha turned to him, noting how the sunlight caught in his hair, revealing strands of gold among the brown. "Why are you doing all this?" Garrett's gaze met hers, and for a moment, something unguarded flickered in his eyes. "Everyone deserves a second chance, Mrs. Clarke." "Tabitha," she corrected softly. "If I'm to call you Garrett, then you should call me Tabitha." He nodded, a hint of a smile playing at his lips. "Tabitha, then." Over the next few weeks, Tabitha transformed the cabin into a home. Martha supplied her with fabric for curtains and helped her sew cushions for the chairs Garrett had brought from town. The ranch hands, initially shy around her, gradually warmed to her presence, especially when she began teaching their children in the afternoons. Tommy proved to be an eager student, soaking up knowledge like a sponge. "Miss Tabitha," he asked one day after their lesson. "Will you stay here forever?" Tabitha smiled gently at the boy. "I don't know what forever holds, Tommy, but I'm here now." "I hope you stay," he said earnestly. "The boss smiles more since you came." His innocent observation caught Tabitha off guard. Had Garrett's demeanor changed? She hadn't noticed, but then again, she hadn't known him before. That evening, as summer gave way to early autumn, Tabitha sat on the small porch of her cabin, watching Emily kick her legs on a blanket spread on the wooden planks. The sound of approaching hoofbeats made her look up to see Garrett riding toward her, his figure silhouetted against the setting sun. He dismounted smoothly and tied his horse to the porch railing. "Good evening," he greeted, removing his hat. "I hope I'm not intruding." "Not at all," Tabitha replied, gesturing to the empty chair beside her. "Please join me." Garrett settled into the chair, his gaze moving to Emily, who gurgled happily at the sight of him. Over the past weeks, the baby had grown accustomed to his presence, often reaching for him when he was near. "She's growing stronger every day," Garrett observed. "Just like her mother." Tabitha felt a blush creep into her cheeks at the compliment. "We both are, thanks to you. I hear the lessons are going well." "They are. Tommy has a quick mind. He could go far with proper education." "He reminds me of myself at that age," Garrett admitted. "Always curious, always asking questions." "Did you have a teacher who encouraged you?" A shadow crossed Garrett's face. "My father believed education was a waste of time for a rancher's son. I learned to read and write from my mother in secret. When she died, I was 13. I left home at 15 and worked my way across Texas and New Mexico before settling here." "You've built something remarkable," Tabitha said softly. "It wasn't easy," he acknowledged, "but nothing worthwhile ever is." They sat in comfortable silence as the last rays of sunlight disappeared behind the mountains. Emily eventually dozed off, and Tabitha carefully lifted her to take her inside. "Let me help," Garrett offered, rising to open the door. Inside the cabin, Tabitha gently placed Emily in the small crib that one of the ranch hands had crafted for her. She turned to find Garrett watching them, an unreadable expression on his face. "Would you like some coffee?" she asked, suddenly aware of how alone they were. "I should head back to the main house," he declined politely. "But thank you." At the door, he paused. "The Harvest Festival is happening in town this weekend. I thought perhaps you and Emily might like to attend. It would be a chance for you to meet some of the townspeople." Tabitha hesitated. She hadn't left the ranch since arriving and wasn't sure she was ready to face strangers' curious glances and inevitable questions. Sensing her reluctance, Garrett added, "You'd be under my protection, of course. No one would dare say anything inappropriate." The fierce protectiveness in his tone sent a small thrill through her. "In that case, we would be happy to accompany you," she found herself saying. His smile, one of the few full smiles she'd seen from him, lit up his entire face. "Excellent. I'll have the wagon ready on Saturday morning." After he left, Tabitha stood at the window, watching his retreating figure until he disappeared into the darkness. A strange, unfamiliar feeling had taken root in her heart, something she hadn't felt since before Franklin's betrayal. It terrified and exhilarated her in equal measure. "This is dangerous," she whispered to herself. "Don't be a fool again, Tabitha." But as she prepared for bed that night, she couldn't help wondering what dress would be most suitable for the festival. Saturday dawned clear and crisp, with the promise of a perfect autumn day. Tabitha had risen before first light, nervous energy propelling her through her morning routine. She'd chosen her best dress, a deep green calico that Martha had helped her alter to fit her post-pregnancy figure. It wasn't fashionable by Boston standards, but it was clean and presentable. Emily was dressed in a white gown that Martha had sewn, complete with a tiny bonnet to shield her from the sun. As Tabitha fed her daughter, a knock sounded at the cabin door. "Come in," she called, expecting to see Martha, who had promised to help with her hair. Instead, Garrett entered, looking more polished than usual in a clean black coat over his usual shirt and vest. He trimmed his beard and combed his hair neatly back from his forehead. "Good morning," he said, stopping short when he saw her. "You look very nice, Tabitha." "Thank you," she replied, feeling suddenly shy. "We're almost ready." Garrett nodded, his gaze lingering on her for a moment before he cleared his throat. "I brought something for you for today." He withdrew a small package from his pocket and handed it to her. Tabitha carefully balanced Emily in one arm while opening the package with her free hand. Inside was a delicate silver brooch in the shape of a flower. "It was my mother's," Garrett explained. "I thought it might complement your dress." "It's beautiful," Tabitha breathed, deeply touched by the gesture. "But I couldn't possibly, please," he interrupted. "It's been sitting in a drawer for years. My mother would have wanted it to be worn." Tabitha nodded, unable to refuse such a heartfelt offer. "Would you help me pin it?" "My hands are full." Garrett stepped forward, taking the brooch with careful fingers. As he pinned it to her collar, Tabitha was acutely aware of his proximity, of the clean scent of soap that clung to him, of the slight tremor in his hands as they brushed against her neck. "There," he said softly, stepping back. "Perfect." Martha arrived moments later, clucking approvingly at the sight of them. "Don't you three make a handsome family?" she remarked without thinking. An awkward silence fell. Tabitha felt her cheeks flush, and Garrett suddenly became very interested in adjusting his hat. "We should get going," he finally said. "The wagon's out front." The journey to Prescott took just under 2 hours. As they approached the town, Tabitha felt anxiety tightening her chest. The last time she had been here was the day of the auction, the lowest point in her life. "We don't have to stay long," Garrett assured her, noticing her discomfort. "Just enough to show our faces." "No," Tabitha said firmly. "I won't hide away. I've done nothing to be ashamed of." Garrett's expression filled with admiration. "You're a remarkable woman, Tabitha Clarke." The town square had been transformed for the festival. Colorful bunting hung between buildings. Stalls offering food and handcrafted goods lined the streets, and a band played lively music in the center of the square. Children darted between adults, laughing and playing games. As they walked through the crowd, Tabitha was painfully aware of the curious glances and whispered conversations that followed them. Garrett stayed close to her side, his hand occasionally coming to rest at the small of her back, guiding her through the throng. "Garrett." "Didn't expect to see you in town today," called a portly man with an impressive mustache. He approached them, his curious gaze moving from Garrett to Tabitha and Emily. "Sheriff Adams," Garrett greeted, shaking the man's hand. "I'd like you to meet Mrs. Tabitha Clarke and her daughter Emily. They're staying at Sunrise Ranch. Tabitha, this is Sheriff William Adams." The sheriff tipped his hat respectfully. "Madam, a pleasure. Any friend of Garrett's is welcome in Prescott." "Thank you, Sheriff," Tabitha replied, relieved by his cordial reception. "The missus is over by the pie contest," Sheriff Adams continued. "She'd love to meet you. She's always saying Garrett needs to socialize more." As they made their way through the festival, Tabitha was introduced to more of the townspeople. Some were openly curious, others more reserved, but none mentioned the auction or questioned her presence with Garrett. Mrs. Adams Beatrice proved to be a friendly, talkative woman who immediately took to Emily, cooing over the baby and declaring her the prettiest little thing in the territory. "You must join us for Sunday dinner sometime," she insisted. "It's about time Garrett brought a lady friend to town." "Oh, we're not," Tabitha began to correct her. "That's very kind of you, Beatrice," Garrett interjected smoothly. "Perhaps when Emily is a bit older." As the afternoon progressed, Tabitha gradually relaxed, even enjoying herself as they watched the various contests and sampled the festival food. Emily, passed from one admiring woman to another, reveled in the attention. "Would you like to try?" Garrett asked as they paused near a ring toss game. "I'm afraid I'd be terrible at it," Tabitha laughed. "Nonsense. Here." He paid the stall keeper and handed her 3 rings. "Just aim for the bottles." Tabitha's first 2 attempts missed completely, but her 3rd ring landed perfectly around a bottle neck. The stall keeper handed her a small prize, a colorful wooden top. "For Emily when she's older," Tabitha said, tucking it safely into her pocket. As the sun began to set, the band struck up a slower tune and couples moved to the cleared space in front of them to dance. "Would you care to dance?" Garrett asked, offering his hand. Tabitha hesitated. "Emily is quite content with Mrs. Adams, it seems," he observed, nodding toward the sheriff's wife who was still happily holding the baby. After securing Beatrice's promise to watch Emily for a few minutes, Tabitha allowed Garrett to lead her to the dancing area. His hand was warm and steady at her waist, his other hand gently holding hers. "I must warn you, I haven't danced in a very long time," Tabitha said as they began to move with the music. "You're doing just fine," Garrett assured her. "Just follow my lead." As they swayed to the gentle melody, Tabitha found herself studying his face, the lines at the corners of his eyes that appeared when he smiled, the small scar on his chin, the way his eyes reflected the golden light of the setting sun. For the first time, she allowed herself to acknowledge the attraction she felt toward this man who had saved her and her daughter. "What are you thinking?" Garrett asked softly, catching her gaze. "That I'm grateful," she replied honestly. "Not just for what you did that day, but for everything since. You've brought life back to the ranch," he said. "Tommy adores you. Martha says she hasn't felt so useful in years. And the men, well, they'd walk through fire for you after you taught old Pete to write his own name." Tabitha smiled at the memory of the grizzled ranch hand's pride when he'd first signed his name instead of marking an X. "They're good people." "Yes, they are." Garrett's expression grew serious. "Tabitha, I've been meaning to ask you. The stagecoach comes through again next week. Have you given any thought to your plans?" The question caught her off guard, though she should have expected it. In the comfortable routine they'd established, she'd almost forgotten that her stay at Sunrise Ranch was meant to be temporary. "Are you asking me to leave?" she asked carefully. "No," he replied quickly, "just the opposite, in fact." The music ended, but neither of them moved to break apart. "I'd like you to stay, permanently." Tabitha's heart skipped a beat. "As your employee," Garrett took a deep breath. "As whatever you wish to be, I've grown fond of you, Tabitha. And of Emily. The ranch feels like a home again with you both there, but I would understand if you wanted to start fresh somewhere else, away from the memories of what happened here." Before she could respond, a commotion near the saloon caught their attention. Raised voices and the sound of breaking glass cut through the festive atmosphere. "Wait here," Garrett instructed, releasing her and moving toward the disturbance. Tabitha returned to Beatrice and Emily, watching with concern as Garrett and Sheriff Adams approached a group of men outside the saloon. One man, clearly drunk, was shouting and gesturing wildly. "It's just Wade Miller causing trouble again," Beatrice said dismissively. "The sheriff will handle it." But as Tabitha watched, the drunk man suddenly looked in her direction, his face contorting with recognition. Her blood ran cold as she realized who it was, one of the men who had bid on her at the auction. "That's her," he bellowed, pointing a wavering finger. "Blackburn's fancy woman. Bought at auction like a prize heifer." A hush fell over the crowd as all eyes turned toward Tabitha. She stood frozen, clutching Emily to her chest. shame and anger warring within her. Garrett moved with lightning speed, grabbing the drunk man by his shirt front. "Apologize to the lady," he demanded, his voice dangerously low. "Why should I?" the man sneered. "Everyone knows where you got her. How much did you pay again, Blackburn?" $100 for her and the brat." Garrett's fist connected with the man's jaw, sending him sprawling in the dust. Sheriff Adams stepped between them before Garrett could land another blow. "That's enough, Garrett," the sheriff warned. "Miller, you're spending the night in jail." As two deputies dragged the protesting drunkard away, Tabitha felt the weight of the townspeople's stares. The wonderful day had been shattered, and all the fears she'd pushed aside came rushing back. "We're leaving," Garrett announced, returning to her side. His knuckles were bloody, his expression thunderous. The ride back to the ranch passed in tense silence. Emily, sensing the change in mood, began to fuss, and Tabitha focused on soothing her daughter rather than addressing what had happened. When they reached the cabin, Garrett helped her down from the wagon, his touch gentle despite his obvious anger. "I'm sorry," he said finally. "I should never have asked you to go to town. It was too soon." "It's not your fault," Tabitha replied, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her. "That man was drunk and cruel. But he wasn't wrong, was he?" Garrett's face was etched with self-recrimination. "I did buy you. No matter my intentions, that's how it began." "That's how it began," Tabitha agreed quietly, "but it's not what defines us now." She reached up, touching his bruised knuckles lightly. "Thank you for defending my honor." Garrett looked down at her hand on his, then met her gaze with an intensity that made her breath catch. "I would do a lot more than that to protect you and Emily." In that moment, with the moonlight silvering his features and honesty burning in his eyes, Tabitha made her decision. "About what you asked earlier, I don't want to leave, Garrett. This place, this ranch, it feels like home now." Relief washed over his face. "I'm glad to hear it. But," she continued carefully, "if I stay, we need to be clear about what that means. I won't be beholden to anyone ever again, not even you. I need to stand on my own 2 feet." "I understand," Garrett said solemnly. "What if I offered you a partnership of sorts? The schoolhouse I've been promising to build for the children, it could be yours to run. A proper salary, your own domain." "A partnership," Tabitha repeated, considering the idea. "I think I'd like that." Garrett's smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. Then it settled. "We'll start building as soon as possible." As he bid her good night and turned to go, Tabitha felt a strange mixture of satisfaction and disappointment. She had secured her future and Emily's, yet something remained unresolved between them, something neither of them was quite ready to name. The autumn days grew shorter as October gave way to November. True to his word, Garrett began construction on a small schoolhouse near the main ranch buildings. Tabitha often visited the site, offering suggestions and watching with growing excitement as her new domain took shape. One crisp morning, as she walked Emily in her carriage around the ranch, she encountered Garrett deep in conversation with a stranger, a well-dressed man who carried himself with the air of someone accustomed to authority. "Ah, Tabitha," Garrett called when he spotted her. "Come meet Judge Harrison. He's ridden all the way from the territorial capital." Judge Harrison, a dignified older man with silver hair and penetrating gray eyes, bowed slightly. "Mrs. Clarke, a pleasure. Garrett has spoken highly of you." "Judge Harrison is here on official business," Garrett explained, his expression unusually animated. "He has news that might interest you." The judge nodded, his expression grave yet satisfied. "Indeed. I've come to inform you that Franklin Owens has been apprehended in Tucson. He's facing charges of fraud, theft, and," he glanced at Emily, "human trafficking." Tabitha's knees weakened and she gripped the carriage handle tighter to steady herself. "He's been caught," she whispered. "Yes, madam. And there are multiple witnesses to his crimes, yourself included should you be willing to testify." "I would," Tabitha said without hesitation, a fierce protectiveness rising within her. "I would face him again to ensure he can't hurt anyone else." Judge Harrison nodded approvingly. "The trial is set for next month in Tucson. With your testimony, I'm confident he'll face the maximum sentence." After the judge departed, Garrett walked Tabitha back toward her cabin, both lost in thought. "Will you go?" he asked finally. "To Tucson, I must," she replied. "For my own peace of mind and for Emily's future." Garrett nodded, his expression troubled. "Then I'll go with you. You shouldn't have to face this alone." "Garrett, you can't leave the ranch for that long. The ranch will survive a few weeks without me," he insisted. "This is more important." His steadfast support touched her deeply. "Thank you," she said simply. That evening, after putting Emily to bed, Tabitha sat on her porch, wrapped in a blanket against the November chill. The prospect of confronting Franklin filled her with dread, yet also a strange sense of liberation. Closure, perhaps, on the darkest chapter of her life. She heard footsteps approaching and looked up to see Garrett, carrying 2 steaming mugs. "Thought you might like some coffee," he said, offering her one. "Thank you." She accepted the mug gratefully, savoring its warmth between her palms. Garrett settled in the chair beside her, looking out at the starlit landscape. "Beautiful night," he observed. She agreed, sipping her coffee. "Though getting colder. I'll need to chop more firewood tomorrow." "I'll send one of the men to help." "That's not necessary." "I'm perfectly capable. I know you are," he interrupted gently. "But you don't have to do everything alone anymore, Tabitha." The simple truth of his statement disarmed her. Since Franklin's betrayal, she had been fiercely guarding her independence, reluctant to rely on anyone, even Garrett, despite all he'd done for her. "Old habits," she murmured apologetically. "I understand," he said. "Trust comes hard when it's been broken." They sat in companionable silence, drinking their coffee and watching the stars. Tabitha found herself studying his profile, wondering what thoughts moved behind those thoughtful blue eyes. "Have you ever been married?" she asked suddenly. Garrett looked surprised by the question. "No," he answered. "Came close once years ago. Elizabeth was her name, daughter of a rancher in Texas." "What happened?" A shadow crossed his face. "Her father lost everything in a drought. They moved east to live with relatives. She wrote for a while, then the letters stopped coming." He shrugged, as if dismissing an old pain. "It was for the best, probably. I was young and foolish, with nothing to offer a wife." "And now?" Tabitha asked softly. Garrett's gaze met hers, steady and intense. "Now I have everything to offer except perhaps the assurance that I'd be any good at it. Being a husband, I mean." The air between them seemed to thicken with unspoken possibilities. Tabitha found herself holding her breath, waiting for what might come next, but the moment passed as Garrett stood, collecting her empty mug along with his own. "It's getting late. We should both get some rest." "Yes," Tabitha agreed, hiding her disappointment. "Good night, Garrett. Good night, Tabitha." He hesitated, then added, "Whatever happens in Tucson, remember you're not alone anymore." As she watched him walk away, Tabitha acknowledged the truth she'd been avoiding for weeks. She was falling in love with Garrett Blackburn. The realization terrified her. She had trusted her heart once before and paid dearly for it. Could she risk it again? The journey to Tucson took 3 days by stagecoach. Garrett had arranged for Martha to stay at the main house, while Tommy and the ranch foreman, Jake, would oversee daily operations in their absence. Emily proved to be a surprisingly good traveler, content to sleep in her mother's arms or observe the passing scenery with curious eyes. Other passengers, Initially wary of traveling with an infant, soon warmed to her sunny disposition. Garrett was a considerate companion, ensuring Tabitha and Emily had the most comfortable seats and stopping frequently to allow them to rest. His protective presence made the journey far less arduous than it might have been. They arrived in Tucson on a Sunday afternoon and took rooms at a respectable hotel near the courthouse. The trial was set to begin on Tuesday, giving Tabitha a day to recover from their journey and prepare herself mentally for the ordeal ahead. Monday evening found them dining in the hotel restaurant, Emily asleep in a makeshift cradle the hotel staff had provided. "Are you nervous about tomorrow?" Garrett asked, noticing Tabitha's distracted demeanor. "Yes," she admitted. "Not about testifying. I know what I need to say. It's—" Seeing him again, Franklin. Garrett reached across the table, covering her hand with his. "You don't have to look at him if you don't want to. Just focus on the judge and jury." "I will look at him," Tabitha said, a steely determination in her voice. "I want him to see that he didn't break me. That Emily and I are thriving despite what he did." Garrett's eyes filled with admiration. "You're the strongest person I know, Tabitha Clarke." She smiled faintly. "Not always, but I'm learning." When Tuesday morning dawned, Tabitha dressed with particular care in her best dress, pinning Garrett's mother's brooch to her collar. It had become something of a talisman to her, a reminder of kindness in a world that had often been cruel. The courthouse was crowded when they arrived. Judge Harrison had arranged for a local woman to mind Emily during the proceedings, understanding that a courtroom was no place for a baby. As Tabitha entered the courtroom, her eyes immediately sought out Franklin. He sat at the defendant's table, diminished somehow from the charming, confident man who had swept her off her feet in Boston. When their eyes met, he quickly looked away, unable to hold her gaze. The trial proceeded with methodical efficiency. Other witnesses testified to Franklin's various schemes and deceptions, a pattern of behavior that had left a trail of victims across multiple territories. When Tabitha's turn came, she spoke clearly and without embellishment, describing how Franklin had isolated her from her family, spent her savings, and ultimately sold her to cover his gambling debts. "And did the defendant show any concern for your welfare or that of your unborn child?" the prosecutor asked. "None," Tabitha replied steadily. "He left me chained in a storeroom for 2 days before the auction, with only enough water to keep me alive." A murmur of outrage rippled through the courtroom. Franklin seemed to shrink further in his seat. "And how did you escape this situation, Mrs. Clarke?" Tabitha's gaze unconsciously sought out Garrett, who sat in the front row of the gallery. "A man of honor purchased me and my daughter at the auction, then immediately set us free. He expected nothing in return." The contrast between the two men could not have been more stark, and Tabitha knew from the expressions on the jurors' faces that they saw it too. The defense attorney's cross-examination was brief and ineffective. By the time Tabitha stepped down from the witness stand, Franklin's fate was all but sealed. The jury deliberated for less than an hour before returning with their verdict: guilty on all counts. Judge Harrison sentenced Franklin to 15 years in the territorial prison, his expression stern as he condemned the man's unconscionable betrayal of a trusting wife and innocent child. As the bailiffs led Franklin away, he finally looked directly at Tabitha. She thought she detected remorse in his eyes, but it was too little, too late. Her heart felt oddly light as she watched him go, not with vindication or satisfaction, but with a sense of closure. That chapter of her life was truly finished now. Outside the courthouse, Garrett waited with Emily in his arms. The baby had grown accustomed to him over the past months, often reaching for him when he was nearby. "It's done," Tabitha said simply. 15 years. Justice, then, Garrett replied, handing Emily to her mother. How do you feel? Tabitha considered the question as she cradled her daughter close. Free, she said finally. Truly free. They returned to the hotel, both emotionally exhausted from the day's events. After settling Emily for a nap, Tabitha joined Garrett in the small sitting area adjoining their rooms. The stagecoach leaves tomorrow morning, he said. Unless you'd prefer to rest another day before traveling. Tabitha shook her head. No, I'm ready to go home. The words slipped out naturally, and she didn't correct herself. Sunrise Ranch had become home in every way that mattered. Tabitha, Garrett began, his expression serious. There's something I've been wanting to discuss with you. Her heart quickened at his tone. Yes. The schoolhouse will be finished by the time we return. You'll have your teaching position, your own income, as we agreed. He paused, seeming to gather his courage. But I've been thinking about what else you said about standing on your own 2 feet, not being beholden to anyone. I remember, she said quietly. I respect that more than you know. Your independence, your strength, they're part of what I. He hesitated, then pressed on. Part of what I love about you. Tabitha's breath caught in her throat. Garrett, please let me finish, he said gently. I'm not asking you to be beholden to me. I'm asking if you would consider a true partnership in every sense of the word. I love you, Tabitha. I love Emily as if she were my own. I want to build a life with you both if you'll have me. Tears welled in Tabitha's eyes, but they were tears of joy, not sorrow. I've been so afraid, she whispered. Afraid to trust again, to love again. But you've shown me day after day what a good man truly is. Is that a yes? Garrett asked, hope lighting his features. Tabitha laughed, a sound of pure happiness. Yes, Garrett Blackburn, yes, I will marry you. He crossed the space between them in 2 strides, gathering her in his arms and kissing her with a tenderness that made her knees weak. When they finally parted, both breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. I promise you'll never regret this, he vowed. I'll spend my life making you and Emily happy. I know you will, she said, confident in the truth of it, and we'll do the same for you. They were married 3 weeks after returning to Prescott, in a simple ceremony at the small church in town. Beatrice Adams had insisted on hosting a reception afterward, and much of the town turned out to celebrate with them. The same people who had once whispered about Blackburn's auction woman now raised glasses to the new Mrs. Blackburn, their initial curiosity replaced by genuine affection. Martha wept openly during the ceremony, later confiding to Tabitha that she'd been praying for that stubborn man to find someone for years. Tommy proudly served as ring bearer, his usually dirty face scrubbed clean for the occasion. As Garrett carried Emily up the steps of the main house that evening, their home now, all 3 of them together, he paused to kiss his new wife once more. Welcome home, Mrs. Blackburn, he said softly. It's been home for some time now, Tabitha replied, her heart full to bursting. You made it so, from that very first day. Spring brought new beginnings to Sunrise Ranch. The schoolhouse opened with 6 students, Tommy and 5 children of the ranch hands, with Tabitha presiding as teacher. Her innovative methods and genuine care for her pupils quickly earned her the respect of the entire community. Emily took her first steps in the garden behind the main house, tottering determinedly from Garrett's outstretched hands to Tabitha's waiting arms. Her first word, fittingly, was Papa, a title Garrett wore with immense pride. Though Emily would someday learn the truth of her parentage, there was never any doubt in anyone's mind that she was Garrett's daughter in every way that mattered. By summer, Tabitha was carrying their second child, a son. They both somehow knew, though the doctor chuckled at their certainty. Garrett became even more protective, insisting she cut back on her teaching duties and rest frequently. "I'm pregnant, not made of glass," she protested one evening as he fluffed pillows behind her on the porch swing. "Indulge me," he replied, kissing her forehead. "I missed this the first time around." She softened at his words. Understanding the mixture of joy and regret, he felt joy at their expanding family, regret that he hadn't been there for Emily's earliest days. "You'll be there for everything this time," she assured him, taking his hand and placing it on her gently rounded belly. "Every kick, every hiccup, every midnight craving." "I can't wait," he said, his voice rough with emotion. In February of 1878, Gabriel Thomas Blackburn arrived with a lusty cry that, according to Martha, rattled the windows clear across the ranch. Emily, now a precocious toddler of nearly 2, regarded her new brother with fascination and only occasional jealousy. The following years brought both joys and challenges to the Blackburn family. The ranch prospered under Garrett's careful management, allowing them to expand their holdings and implement modern innovations. Tabitha's school grew to include children from neighboring ranches, and even a few from town who boarded with them during the week. In 1880, they welcomed their second son, Michael, and 2 years later, their daughter Catherine completed their family. The main house, once so quiet and somber, now rang with children's laughter and the everyday chaos of family life. Emily, growing into a thoughtful young woman with her mother's intelligence and her adoptive father's steadfast nature, showed a particular aptitude for medicine. On her 18th birthday, Garrett and Tabitha presented her with acceptance papers to a women's medical college in Philadelphia, a rare opportunity that brought tears to the young woman's eyes. "Are you sure we can afford this?" she asked, always practical despite her excitement. "We've been saving for it since you were 7 and announced you wanted to fix people," Garrett replied, his pride evident. "Nothing would make us happier than seeing you pursue your dream." As they prepared for Emily's departure east, Tabitha often found herself reflecting on the extraordinary journey that had brought them to this point. One evening, she discovered Garrett on the porch of their home, staring thoughtfully at the sunset. "Penny for your thoughts?" she asked, slipping her arm through his. "Just thinking about how different things might have been," he replied, drawing her close. "If I hadn't gone to town that day, if I'd been a few minutes late to the auction. Or if Franklin had been a better man," Tabitha added softly. "But we can't live in what-ifs, my love, only in what is." Garrett smiled down at her, the same smile that still made her heart skip after all these years. "And what is, Mrs. Blackburn, is pretty wonderful." "It certainly is," she agreed, leaning into his embrace. From inside came the sound of their children's voices, Gabriel and Michael arguing good-naturedly over a chess game, Catherine practicing her reading with Emily's patient guidance. Their family, improbable in its beginnings but unshakable in its bonds. "You ever regret it?" Garrett asked suddenly. "Coming west with Franklin, everything that happened," Tabitha considered the question seriously. "I regret the pain, the fear, the betrayal," she said finally, "but I can't regret the path that led me to you, to our children, to this life we've built." She reached up to touch his face, the familiar contours as dear to her now as they had been shocking that first day. "From the moment you unlocked those shackles, you were setting me free in more ways than you knew." "I think we set each other free," Garrett replied. "I was just as chained as you were in my own way. To guilt, to the past, to loneliness. Then we saved each other," Tabitha concluded, rising on tiptoes to kiss him softly. As twilight deepened into evening, they remained on the porch, counting stars as they had taught their children to do, secure in the knowledge that their love, born in the most unlikely of circumstances, had not only survived but flourished, transforming 2 broken lives into one extraordinary family. In the years that followed, Sunrise Ranch became known throughout the territory not just for its fine cattle and progressive farming methods, but for the family at its heart, a testament to the transformative power of compassion, courage, and love in the wild and unforgiving West. And whenever anyone asked how the Blackburns had met, Garrett would simply say, "I found a treasure at an auction once," and Tabitha would smile, knowing that in saving her and Emily that day, he had claimed not a possession but a future one they had built together, day by day, choice by choice, until what began in desperation had blossomed into the fullest expression of freedom either of them had ever known.